So I've finished The Burning God now, which is the third entry in Kuang's Poppy War series, and I'm a little disappointed by it. I actually have one glaring issue with the book, but it's strange because everything in the book, from the themes to the characters to the story, I can completely get behind, but there's just this one glaring issue that sort of overshadows the book for me. And that glaring issue is that this book should have been two separate books. There should have been a fourth entry in this, and this story should have been split up because there is simply too much packed in here, and the storylines and the characters and the endings that she wants for all this are just too rushed. There's just too much going on in too little time, and I feel like I'm watching the last two seasons of Game of Thrones. What I mean by that is you have storylines which in the previous two books would have taken, like half the book to, resolve, and she is cracking it out within 40-50 pages just to sort of give some resolution to the story and to the characters that she's created, and it's done to the detriment of the book as a whole. Not to say that the material isn't good. Like, I really enjoy what she's doing. Like, if you gave me this information at the end of the second book, saying this is how this character's going to end, this is the history that we're going to go into, this is how this is going to be resolved, I would go, yes, 100% on board. That sounds really, really good, really great ideas. But the way in which she implements them, it's done too quick, and the pacing suffers. It has the opposite issue of a lot of large fantasy books, in which they're just incredibly slow burns and they can be really hard to get through. But in this one, it's the complete opposite. It's that, we're burning through too much material too quickly, and I feel like I can't sit down and breathe with the characters and with the story. Now, that's not to say the quality of the storytelling or anything like that has dipped. It's definitely not. She's still at the top of her game in this. Her writing style is still very, very good. The themes are still very strong, and I do enjoy reading the book. But because the quality of her writing has been to such a high standard in the past two books, and the writing and the plot has been so tight, that now that I'm experiencing this sort of rushed story, I'm sitting thinking to myself, no, I expect better of you at this point. Which for her as an author, I suppose, is a good thing. It's a compliment. But yeah, I can't help but feel that there are elements of the book in which suffer as a result of this not just being a larger work. And I can understand her not wanting to make this book 1,000 pages, which is why I would recommend splitting it in two and having a fourth entry into the series. But it seems that a free book series was what she originally wanted, and she has had to sacrifice some elements of the character's story and history that she laid out in order to reach that. Now I'll move on to the stuff that I actually really liked about this book. First of all, I like the ending of this book. A lot of people have sent their therapy bills to Kuang for the ending of this book, which I completely understand. I feel like I should probably send mine as well. Because this book is not a happy ever after. It's brutally honest, completely real, and very fitting for the characters. And I'm not going to be able to talk about that without saying that there's spoilers ahead, because I do want to talk about the ending of this book in more detail. So this book ends with Rin essentially descending into madness. She's kind of become this dictator who wants to wipe out the Western nations in their entirety using the power of the Phoenix, and she is trying to drag along her incredibly war-exhausted and traumatized people into an even larger war, despite the fact that she has won the war for the country already. And obviously the ordinary people just want to return to some kind of normalcy. They want their lives back. They're starving, they're suffering, their disease is rampant, and the power structures within the country have completely broken down, so nothing is actually getting done domestically, and it's a massive issue. And Kuang is commenting a lot here that there's a big difference between winning a war and being a soldier, and running the country after that. Rin is just a complete disaster at it. She's sort of relying and leaning too much on Kitai as well, and Kitai has limits, and he is not able to cope with the pressure either. And they're both sort of playing off each other's sort of stress and just inability to rule this country, because right up until then they've been conquerors, but they've not been rulers. And I like that starts to cause Rin to properly unravel, because in the past Rin has been betrayed, she's been traumatized, she's committed acts that go against her very nature as a human. But in the end, she always seems to have a solid target that she can direct her anger and aggression to. And in that, it gives her a goal and it gives her a drive, and that helps push her on. But the issue she has now is that these are domestic issues. You cannot burn away famine. You can't burn away disease. You basically need to find a clever way to work around it and to cope with it. And she just cannot accept that as a reality. And she is basically asking people to push themselves beyond what they're even capable of doing anymore. And you can see that that's causing her to just unravel. And this is where, again, the pacing issue comes into play. This is all happening towards like the last maybe 100 pages of the book, where it felt like this should have been sort of bang in the middle of the book that this started to develop, where Rin was starting to lose her mind, starting to mistrust people and starting to turn on her allies. Because in the end, her decline is very, very sharp and very, very quick. And it felt a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of out of place for everything else, because everything else has been, so laid out very well and it's been paced very well. And this sort of comes abrupt and it's kind of incongruent with the story. Another thing I enjoyed that sort of gets affected by the same issue was the trifecta coming back. I loved seeing the interactions that Zhong and the Vipress have with Rin whenever they're not actively trying to kill her. They're really, really interesting characters. They play off each other very well, and I just wanted more and more of them. They're just so interesting, and their viewpoints on how to rule and the way in which you assert your power and dominance are very, very interesting, and they're very challenging for Rin, because they are not morally good people. So they constantly challenge her own sense of sort of moral ambiguity, and honestly they just tell her to become a dictator. And she is sort of grappling with the idea that for this country, maybe they're right, that this is the only way that she can assert any kind of power or influence over people, is by dominating them in the same way that they previously did. But again, they're just sort of blown up out of the story in this kind of really unsatisfying turn of events that felt more like a finale for another book than, like this sort of midway point that they are like gotten rid of and they're written out. I was expecting them to come back because they were played up to be these major characters and these major players, and they're just sort of taken off the chessboard very, very quickly, I have to say. And I did not enjoy that element of the way that they ended. I think it was a big issue. That's when I started seeing the pacing issues throughout the story. But despite all that, this is still a really, really good read. It's a really, really good fantasy book. Again, so much of what Kuang does here is just really good writing, and she is a really, really talented author, and I do enjoy this book. Obviously, I have issues with it, but I still enjoy the read, and I still would recommend it to someone because it is just that good. I would give it like a high 3 out of 5, but in the end, I would still recommend it. Definitely pick it up. I enjoyed reading the series, and I would say that Kuang should be proud of this work.